Hi, welcome back to the channel. This video shows the construction of a flat roof for a rear extension. Now the videos that you'll see are actually a compilation of a series of videos that we posted onto the channel documenting the construction of a full extension from start to finish. But I know there's a lot of people who are interested in roofing and particularly just the roof structure, so I wanted to post a compilation that just covered off the roof structure itself. Now, as you'll see in the video, we actually added a 3-metre extension to an old 3-metre extension, which meant that we had a partial flat roof already in place, which actually presented a number of challenges in itself. It would have been easier to construct the roof entirely from scratch, but the homeowner didn't want that. They wanted to keep the cost down and also wanted to keep the disruption down. So we had to work with the existing roof structure, which made it a bit more difficult than it would have been normally. So you'll see how we worked around that and what we did, and you'll be able to see the full structure as it is completed once you get to the end of this video. So before we get on to the video itself, if you could give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so already, that would be great. We're now starting to prepare the roof for the arrival of the steel beam. So this is the old extension roof. You can see that we've stripped back the old covering, so the plyboard is now visible. And what we're going to do is prepare all of these timbers, so all the ceiling joists that are in place from the old extension. We need to make sure that they're good enough to be able to be used in the new extension roof, and that everything's level and that we don't have any issues with regards to the roof potentially holding water in the future. So we need to make sure it looks like one perfect continuous roof. So here we are on site just doing some of that work. So we've got to remove all the old nails and anything else that's been fitted into these timber joists. That all needs to be taken out, and these need to be perfectly straight and smooth so that we've got a perfect roof. If you think about what's going to happen here, the steel beam will be inserted from wall to wall, so it will go across the front of all of these joists, and because it's an I-beam, those joists will be fitted into it so that it fits in snugly on both sides. So the steel beam will spread the load of the weight of the roof and will basically have joists on either side of it. So we'll put new joists in on the new extension part of it, but we've got to fit these old joists into the steel beam once it arrives. From a construction point of view, it would actually be easier to install a completely new roof, because that would mean that we made sure that everything was completely level, we had the right fall on the roof, and that we know exactly what we're working with because all of the timbers would be brand new. The homeowner obviously wanted to keep the cost down, and also this makes it much quicker because we've got half the roof already in place, so we can get to a watertight structure much quicker from here than we would be able to if we were doing the full 6-metre roof from scratch. So that's why we're working with the old roof, but it does mean we need to check on the levels and that everything is perfect before we put the new covering on. So everything's ready. It's now time to put the steel in place. So this is the truck that brought the steel. It's got a winch lift crane on the side of it, you can see there, and this is the steel itself. So it's about 5 meters long. It's not particularly heavy, you can see it's relatively thin. So it's a 4-man lift, we think, and we're going to have to carry this all the way through the house. So it's a case of literally picking it up, having 4 people all the way across the whole beam, and then just carrying it through. So we're just feeding it here through the living room window, and then if we cut to the inside, we're literally going to have to just carry this through to the back of the extension. So we're dealing with the usual health and safety issues, but in addition to that, we're also having to be careful because this is the homeowner's living room and kitchen, so we want to make sure we don't accidentally damage any of the existing property. But this is just a case of carrying this through. We'll then just rest it on the lift here. So we've got the platform in place just to be able to position where we're going to put the steel. And then it's a case of feeding it into position. So as I mentioned before, we've got the joists that we've been preparing from the original extension roof. They need to be fitted into one side, so you can see the I-beam. So if you look at the beam, you can see that it's got a flat piece on the top and then a vertical section and then another flat piece at the bottom. So the joists will fit snugly into that section. So they will fit in nicely on both sides. So we'll fit that tight against the existing roof structure, and then what we will do is put some new timbers in place that will go from the beam to the lintel that we've just installed at the back of the extension. So it's just a case of lifting this up. As we said before, it's not particularly heavy, so it's relatively easy. We don't need any mechanical equipment. Sometimes you would have a winch on site, or if it was a really big steel, you may have to get it craned in over the top of the house, but we don't need to do any of that in this situation because it's relatively light, this beam, so it's pretty easy to manhandle, which is what we're doing here. And then it's literally just a case of putting it in situ. So we've prepared the wall for where it's going, and then it's just a case of maneuvering this into position. So relatively straightforward. And then what we'll need to do is some timber work to make sure that all of these joists that are existing from the old roof fit snugly into that position. So this is the last job for today. Once we've got this in place, we'll be able to then start working on the new roof structure for the new extension roof. So quite an exciting part of the build, not too far away from being watertight once we get to that stage. So relatively straightforward to fit this steel beam. Everything is prepped, all going in nicely. So hopefully this should be quite straightforward to get in. And all the heavy lifting has been done now, so it's literally just a case of fiddling about to make sure that it fits tightly. So if we have a look at it from the other angle, you can see here easily now how the joists fit into the I-beam. So you can see in the central section, if you look just close to where this pipe is, where the guy's standing, we've cut out the top section of the beam. So you can see where he's standing and the one next to it. We've cut a little notch into that, and that's just making sure that it's really tight fitting into the I-beam itself, because this is basically the support for the whole of the roof. So this I-beam here will keep that end of the roof stable, make sure there's no movement, and then we'll just need to fit in the new joists afterwards into the other side as well. As we discussed in the last video, the steel beam is supporting the mid part of the roof structure, and we're now installing new timber joists beyond that, which span from the beam itself through to the lintel at the far end of the extension that we discussed in the last video. So you can see that we've put 4 joists in, and we've started putting the noggins in. So you can see at the far end above the lintel, the far 2 joists have cross sections coming across them, and that's really to give the roof rigidity. So we're basically building a mirror image of what was on the other side. So looking back towards the house, this is a little bit later on the same day, you can see that we've now installed all of the new joists right the way across from the beam to this back section of the house here. We put some ply on just to keep it watertight and give us a level for that. So you can see we haven't put the bricks in yet in the lintel, so the front edge of the lintel, we still haven't inserted those bricks, and that's because we want to get all of this work done first and foremost. Get the joists in place, get the roof structure constructed as we need it to be, and then we can finish off towards the end by putting in the bricks and making sure we've got the right levels, and then we'll finish up with our guttering. Looking inside the property, you can now see that we've stripped off the majority of the old extension roof. So you can see that the joists on the left now don't have a covering on top of them. So this is the reverse angle of that view. So if you at the front edge here, you can see that we've still got some of the old roof and we've removed most of the old roof. So where we're looking here, this is looking up at what was previously the extension roof, the old extension roof. We've kept some of it in place because we're not putting a roof light in there. And then the front edge here is all new construction. So these are all brand new timbers going through to the end where we're going to have the sliding doors, and we've got the old timbers. And you can see in the steel beam we put some noggins in here in between each of the old rafters. So we're just making sure we've got the right spacings and that everything's strong and isn't going to move and give us any problems. So you can see the difference in the timber. This wood is a lot browner than the new timber because it hasn't aged yet, the new timber. Obviously the stuff that was in the old extension roof has been here for 10 or 15 years, so it's aged a little bit, but it's still solid. We checked it all out, it's fine. You're looking back towards the house now, you can see where we've checked out the hangings, so where the joists are connected to the house, we've actually checked all these through and they're still solid and there's no movement there and at the right levels for us, so we are happy to carry on using them in the new structure. So we discussed it last time, but you can see the amount of disruption. There's absolutely no way the homeowner can use this part of the building anymore, so it does throw a lot of your house out of commission when you're doing this sort of work, so you need to take that into account when you're thinking about should I carry on living here or not. Jumping up onto the roof itself, so we've now got all of the timbers in place, so all of the joists are in place. So the next part of the job for us here is to construct the roof lights, and then we can start putting the final finish onto the roof itself. Now the homeowner has changed their mind on the roof lights, so when we talked about it from the plans previously, there was going to be 2 roof lights, one across the new section and one across the old section. That's not the case anymore. They've decided to just have 1 roof light to keep the cost down. So that new roof light will be on the right hand side of the picture here. You can see there's a gap where we've started to construct the actual roof light itself. So that's the aperture that we will be creating for the roof light. What we're going to have to do is build it up. So we will be installing a purpose-built roof light that we are making from glass. So essentially we'll build up the 4 sides around that roof light, and then we'll have a slope on that build up, and we'll put a flat piece of double glazed glazing in. And that's basically the best way of doing these days. You can get purpose built ones from Velux and various other companies, but we find that if you put one solid double glazed piece of glass in and finish it with some edging, that it gives you a much better performance, and it's one single pane. So looking at that gap now, you can see it much easier. So we've constructed quite a big aperture. So this is about 2.5 meters in length by about 1 meter deep. So it's quite a big aperture, and that the idea behind that is to bring a lot of light not just into this part of the building, but also into the section in the middle of the house where the kitchen is. Because what you find with an extension, when you put a big roof on a property like this, it can make the middle part of the old house quite dark because there's no light getting into that. So if you put a roof light somewhere in the middle of your extension roof, or this is towards the back of the extension, then it will bring a lot more light into the whole house itself. So just showing in a bit more detail here, you can see a bit easier the aperture that we've created. So the plan for us now is to start constructing the actual the sides of that itself. You can also see the hangers that we put onto the steel beam here, which are supporting the weight of some of the joists. And that's just really just to give it a bit of extra security, make sure there's no issues going forward with any of this structure. Jumping forward a little, you can now see the construction of the roof light itself is starting to take shape. So we're building that up. That will actually come out and will be a raised structure on top of the roof, which will be set at an angle to make sure that the piece of glass that we put on the top has got runoff, and basically water runs off it and doesn't pool or sit on there. And we're now starting to put the actual covering on the roof itself. So this is going to be a warm deck roof. So it'll be a warm roof. So you've got the choice when you're constructing a roof like this of having either a cold deck roof or a warm deck roof. Cold deck roof basically means that the insulation goes inside the property, so that the actual top of the roof itself is cold, because all the heat from the house is kept within the house. So if you touch the top of that roof, it'd be cold. That's in layman's terms. A warm deck roof, the insulation goes on top of the roof. They're both fairly efficient. The warm deck roof is probably more efficient because the insulation is a complete covering, whereas with a cold deck roof, you have to fit it in between the rafters, so you have joists in there. That means that there isn't a solid covering of insulation. But the negative part of a warm deck roof is that you lose some height, because if you've got a restriction on the total height of your roof itself, and you have to include 150 mil of insulation on top of it, then it means that your internal head height can be lower. We've got plenty of internal head height here, so we could afford to have the warm deck roof, which, as you'll see once we've completed it, does mean that you've got a complete layer of insulation all the way across the top of the roof. So it does make sure it'll be roasty toasty inside. Just looking at what's happening here, we're literally just cutting all of the plyboard out to size. So this is being fitted on top of the joist. So this is basically the start of our roof structure. So just putting this down, and then we'll have a membrane and the insulation, and then the top layer, and then the waterproofing will go on top of that. So it's just a case of cutting these boards to size, screwing them into place. So that's key. So you need to know where all of those rafters are underneath to make sure that you're fitting everything securely and that this is completely solid, because this is obviously the substructure of our whole roof. So we need to fit this down securely, really tight. Make sure we've got the right fall, that we've got a slight fall from back to front, so that the water will run away from the house, and that we can then have everything going towards the gutters. So this is a really important part of the job, getting the levels right. Now that we've done the initial plyboard structure, it's a case of putting down some membrane and the insulation. So as I mentioned before, warm deck roof, this has got 150 mil of insulation. This is rigid form insulation. You can see we are fitting a complete barrier of insulation right the way across the whole roof here. So these come in large pieces. They're 2.4 meters long. So ideally you want to minimize the amount of cuts. So get as many of the big pieces in as you can. And then we'll be taping all of this together to give us a complete barrier. So the idea is that this forms a really efficient layer of insulation on top of the roof, and all of the heat and everything else inside the house is retained. So it becomes thermally efficient and up to modern standards, and will be the most efficient part of the house, because the old house doesn't have any insulation in it. So this new construction will be up to modern standards and fantastic. So it's literally a case of just measuring all this out, fitting it all to size, cutting down each piece, and going around things like the boiler flue that you can see in the bottom of the shot here, the black pipe that's coming out from where the boiler is. You can also see now the build-up that we've created for the roof light. So you can see that that has been constructed up, so it will sit proud of the rest of the roof. It will actually protrude above the whole rest of the roof, and we'll be fitting the glass on top of that at a later point. So this relatively quick, easy job with these boards. This stuff's really light and easy to work with, so you can just use a handsaw on this and just cut it loosely to size, and basically get everything as snug as possible, and really wedge all of this insulation into place so that there's no gaps, so there's nowhere that the heat can escape from. And as I said before, we will be taping over the top of this to make sure everything is super tight and all packed in, so that there's no chance of any heat escaping from this roof once it's fully constructed, and then we've put the membranes and everything on top anyway. So moving into the inside of the house, looking up through the roof light, you now start getting a feel as to what this will look like internally. So you can see the build up that we've created on the roof itself. So as you look up towards the sky, we'll have a single piece of glass. So the view you can see there will be pretty similar to what you'll see when it's finished. And then we will have the nice insides, which we'll finish off, and that will all be painted white, and we'll give it. And you can see the fall on that. You can actually see the angle that we've put into that roof light. Just looking at it from the other side, looking back towards the house, you can get a feel for the scale of it. It's quite a big roof light. It's going to bring a lot of light into the whole of the building. So not just in the extension, but into the whole building itself. And looking at the wood, you can see everything's now all been finalised. This is the underside of the plyboard. So there won't be any insulation going on this side. We're having the warm deck, all the insulation's on the top. So this will just have plasterboard on the underside of it, and obviously we'll then plaster and paint that through. So we're starting to see the construction taking shape now. This whole 6 metre extension really starting to come to life. We've got the big sliding doors at the end. That's going to bring a lot of light in from that end of the building. So it looks a bit dark at the moment, but it's always the case before you've plastered and painted that it looks smaller and darker, and then as you start to finish the work, it starts to get brighter and bigger. You can see the slope here. You can actually see the angle that we've cut into that wood, which will be, when the glass goes on top of that, that will then form the runoff that the water will automatically run off that roof and away from the building. So looking at the finished roof structure now, all the insulation's in place, everything's been fitted. So you can see we've cut it around the boiler flue and the downpipe, which is coming off the roof, and obviously all around the new ROOFLIGHT structure. So this roof is now done at this stage, and the next stage after the insulation goes on is to fit plyboard on top of that insulation. So you can see the guys here have got the sheets of plyboard on site, and now they're just making sure everything is completely square before they start fixing it on top. So you've got to make sure the first piece is perfect, and then every other piece will follow from that. So what they're doing here is just measuring, making sure it's completely plumb and square, and then it's a case of screwing all of this plyboard down into the joist. So the ceiling joist, the rafters, have been set in the structure itself, and we need to find those, and we will screw down through. So you can see the guy's got the drill here, and he's got very long screws, and basically you're screwing all the way down to keep this firmly in place. So that's basically the procedure. We put all of the ply down on top of the insulation, screw it firmly into place. So we'll be fixing lots and lots of screws here to make sure that there's no movement, that we've got a complete covering, that this goes all the way across with no gaps. And then once we put all the plyboard in place, then we will then put the felt coating on top, which is actually the waterproof covering. So the plyboard is not waterproof, and we'll see that in a minute, because we had to have a break between fitting the plyboard and putting the felt on, because the guy who was doing the felt wasn't available. So this isn't waterproof. This is just providing a solid structure that we will then fix the felt onto. So that's basically the procedure that you'll see in this video. So we'll speed it up a little bit now, but you can see that we're just putting the ply all the way across the roof. If you remember from the previous video, we've got a big ROOFLIGHT here. So we've built up an edge around that where the glass will be fitted on top of. You can see it in the bottom right hand corner of the screen at the moment. So we're fitting all of this to the surface, and then we'll have to fit it around this ROOFLIGHT here as well. So that's basically what we're doing. So we'll just skip through that now. So here we are a little bit further on, and all of the ply is now in place. So all of the structure has been completed. So this is all of the construction, but now we need to move to the waterproofing, and that's obviously the critical part. So we've had to make sure that we've got a fall on this roof. So we're falling away from the house. So there is a defined slope on this structure. Obviously it looks very flat when we're looking down on it here, but this roof has a pronounced 4-degree fall from the house to the edge of the structure. And that's really important when you're building a flat roof. They should never ever be flat. They should never be perfectly flat, because obviously water will then sit on top of it. So you have to have a slope to encourage the water to run away. So now that we constructed it, we then had to cover it, because plyboard is not waterproof. There was a storm coming. We couldn't do the felting on the same day because we didn't have time. It was the weekend was coming up, and the guy wasn't available to actually do the felting. So we needed to make sure that we didn't encounter any problems and any damage from the heavy water that we knew was coming. So it's a bit of a hassle, but these things happen on jobs. You know, you have to just take account of what's happening with the weather, and sometimes you can't get everything done in time to beat the weather and make sure that you don't have to do these type of things. So we covered everything up with tarp, and then as we expected, the rain came, and the tarp did its job. So it kept off the water. So you can see here, this is just a brief bit of footage showing the rain coming, and just showing why it's really important to make sure that you cover up the work, because if we hadn't have, then the ply could have become compromised. It could have got saturated and started to split and curl up, and actually not be sound for us to be able to put that felt on as we built through the structure. So really important to take precautions at the end of each stage, and if you know there's some rain coming or some other form of weather, you need to make sure you've taken action to stop it undoing the good work that you've already done. So we're now jumping forward to the day that we're putting the felt on, and as you can see, we've removed the tarpaulin, but there's still quite a bit of damp that's got through. So where the joints were and where it wasn't 100% waterproof, some water has got through, and you can see that the plyboard is wet, and we can't fix felt to wet plyboard, so we're now having to dry that manually. So that's the first job for the roofer, is to get out your gas canister and switch the torch on and actually manually dry this plyboard. So we could obviously wait for this to happen naturally, but we don't want to waste time. This only takes 20 minutes or so if you go around and apply it carefully. Obviously, you need to make sure that you don't cause any damage with the flames, but an experienced roofer will be used to doing this type of preparation before he starts work, so shouldn't be a problem. So we're now on to the time-lapse video for the installation of the felt itself. So you can see that we've got the upstand for the roof light, so we prepared that first. We put some bitumen around there and just made it waterproof, and now we're applying a waterproof membrane. So there's going to be 3 coats to this roof. We're going to have waterproof membrane on the bottom, then we're going to have an underlay as the middle coating, and then we'll have the felt as the top coating. So that's 3 layers of waterproofing, which should mean that this roof will be good for at least the next 20 years. So you can see that we've got the first layer down already. Now we're putting down the undercoat. So this is essentially with overlapping, so you can see where the joints are. They're in different places for the 2 different surfaces, so we don't have consecutive joints on top of one another, so it makes it more difficult for the water to actually penetrate through if you haven't got all of your jointing sitting directly above each other. Very simple, basic roofing technique. But these things are important, and you need to make sure that you understand why it's being done. So that's the purpose of these videos, is to really give everybody an opportunity to have a look at how these things are prepared, so that when you're doing your project, you'll be able to make sure that everything's being done correctly, or if it's being done differently, that the guys doing it can explain to you exactly why they're doing exactly what they're doing. So we've now got the felt to be applied, so just preparing the edge before we do that, so just trimming everything off and making sure that it's nice and square, and then it's just a case of laying the felt in the opposite direction. So you can see that this is coming on at 90 degrees to the 2 joints that we had previously, and that's giving us an additional layer of comfort in terms of the waterproofing, because water has now got to make its way through a lot of different ways to get down through the ceiling, so hopefully it will never happen. So you can see we're just torching this on using the gas burner to melt the undersurface of the felt, which is basically plastic, and as you heat that, it becomes soft and malleable, and as you roll it out, it sticks down to the roof, and once it's in place, it's not going anywhere. It's actually quite difficult to remove. So once that's torched on and fitted, then this is the finished surface for this roof. So you can see there's a bit of tidying up around the edges and making sure that everything's been jointed correctly, and we've finished off all the sides, and essentially making sure that the water is going to run in the right direction and not pool on this roof, which is what you're looking to avoid with all flat roofs. You don't want water to be sitting there to be able to freeze and cause any problems going forward. So that's the main roof done, and then we had to come back and sort out the roof light. So that was a bit more detail and a bit more preparation, and obviously the drip edge there. So the right hand side of the property, we just finished doing all the edging on that, which is clearly important. You can see that we've lapped it up a little bit so that the water will not just run off the edge, but it will run down towards the end of the extension rather than just flowing straight over. Again, very simple, basic flat roofing technique to make sure you can direct the water down to the gutter, which will sit across the bottom of the extension once everything is in place. So now we're just doing some work on the upstand for the roof light. So you can see that we're applying all of the felt around there, cutting small pieces and actually blow torching it on. So exactly the same process that we did for the flat roof itself, but we're now building it all around the upstand so that that's 100% waterproof. And then we're going to fit a large piece of glass on top of that upstand, and that's basically the roof light completed. But this joint here for the curb, for where the upstand comes up, is really important, because anywhere where you've got two surfaces meeting, a vertical and a flat surface, that's always the biggest risk of letting water through, because water can sit there and then over time it could possibly penetrate. So it's really important to get the upstand built correctly and then make sure that the felt waterproofing is perfect, which is why you put some bitumen on it earlier to make sure that it's got some extra level of protection, not just the felt, it's got something else in there to make that wood resist water coming through and entering the building at any point in the future. So just tidying up now, finishing off the last few pieces, pulling everything together, and then we'll be covering over the roof light, because obviously that's still a big hole until we get the glass. We can't do anything with that, so we put a bit of plyboard on that, bit of tarp over the plyboard, and then we're basically done. So this roof is now completely finished, watertight. We've got to put some guttering on the bottom later, but essentially the felt roof is now completed and it's time to go back to doing the internals on the job. So please give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't, and we will see you on the next video.